moment, I'll introduce our Phelps lecturer, Min-Jin Lee. Min-Jin Lee is an acclaimed novelist, essayist. She's the author of 2 best-selling novels, Free Food for Millionaires, Pachinko, which was a finalist for the National Book Award, and giving a warm welcome to Min-Jin Lee.
Wow. You guys, it's snowing outside. Tomiko, thank you so much for that introduction. In March of 1976, my mother, my father, and my 2 sisters and I immigrated. And back in Korea, my father, marketing executive for a cosmetics company. My mother was a neighborhood piano teacher. And my father was born, and he was raised in Wonsan, which is the eastern part of what is now considered North Korea. And he became a war refugee when he was 16 years old. My mother grew up in Busan, which is the southernmost tip. But when they were children, there was only one Korea. Now, I mention the fact that these 2 separate republics were formed in 1948 because it's a material fact. For their married life, they lived in Seoul, where my sisters and I were born. I was about 7.5 when we left. Our modest, middle-class home in Seogyeodong. It was an ordinary, middle-class house with a stone facade. It wasn't large, and it wasn't very special in its appearance. And these standalone houses are mostly gone now in Seoul, replaced by these huge, large apartment buildings. And that's too bad, because I would like to see my old house again. When I recall my childhood, I remember the sound of piano playing, the loud plunking of enthusiastic children who tried to please my mother, who was a very gentle person and a very fine musician. I never once heard her raise her voice at her students. And I think her students loved her. And sometimes when she wasn't teaching, I could hear her play Haydn and Mozart. I remember the smells. There was a time when my mother decided to learn how to make cakes. And during this marvelous period, I recall the eggs and butter and vanilla. It made a really happy impression on me. Christmas, my mother would have a Christmas party, ice cream, to all of her students. My younger sister sang, and I couldn't attend because we were too little, to our uncle's house. And we would eat lots of tangerines until we almost got sick. And we would watch television until it was very late. I attended the local elementary school, tallest child in the class, for both boys and girls. Everybody was seated in size order, so I would sit all the way in the back to daydream. So I was not a very good student. I was bored. I would just get up from my seat and try to wander. I hardly spoke, and I had no friends, have the words to speak to other children. I think in retrospect, I must have had some sort of learning issue. I was profoundly unaware of my social environment, social cues, of my teachers or my peers. And I was 6 years old. I completed my assignment. I got up from my seat and I walked to and fro. And my teacher called my name, come to the front of the classroom. And she told me to hold out my hands like this. No idea what she was going to do. A ruler, and she struck my hands. I don't recall how many times, but it was more than once. I don't recall if it hurt. Mostly I remember, and I felt shamed of myself. Called my mother and asked her to come in. And to this day, I don't know what they discussed. I suppose it must have had something to do with the fact my mother worked all the time teaching piano. My mother came to school to talk with my teacher a very special day because we could go home together. After talking to my teacher, my mother took me to a cafe and she bought me a piece of pastry. She wasn't upset with me, not at all. My mother just said that I should remain in my seat, allowed me to move. School, I always tried to do that. So those are a few of my very persistent, my childhood in Korea today. Because writers need their memories. I have written about Koreans for most of my life. I've been asked why I write about Koreans. It seems like such a strange question to me. Why wouldn't I write about Koreans? About a year and a half ago, a journalist interviewed me. What are Koreans like? What are Koreans like? I thought about the immensity of this question, the overwhelming likelihood of falling into stereotypes and rude, because I had spent some time with this journalist. So I answered him. I told him that Koreans like to dance. 3 months ago, I turned 50. It's hard to believe, isn't it? I write so much about Koreans and have done so for so many. I encountered thousands of Koreans around the world. You will know that there was a miracle on the Han. South Korea's incredible, superhuman economic success as it emerged from a catastrophic post-colonial poverty, and all in a matter of a few decades. Global leaders in internet speed, shipbuilding, steel, automobiles, memory chips, and semiconductors. These are scores: literacy, secondary and tertiary education, world-class athletes, filmmakers, musicians, and artists. Also have the highest rates in plastic surgery, cryptocurrency speculation, youth dissatisfaction. According to the 2018 Global Slavery Index, the highest number of slaves today. 1 out of every 10 North Korean citizens, that is 2 points, live under slavery conditions. 26 million North Koreans are actually hostages. It's the number of churches being built, speed skating gold medals, noses being reconstructed. Koreans hold top positions on important lists, but Koreans like to dance. If you go to festivals or weddings, you will see moving their arms elegantly. Koreans have excellent rhythm, Ani. It's a little inside joke. Like to sing, and we love to eat. And if you know a bit about the Korean psyche, known for carrying this thing, Han, defined as a specific kind that comes from having suffered collectively as a people. And there's also the concept of jang that people develop with time and common experience. Another 10 years passed before I published Pachinko. I wanted to understand the modern 20th century Korean. I could not understand her unless, in the colonial history of Japan and Korea, informed the Korean population in Japan. What is the most important value for Koreans? And I sensed what it was. Koreans value education. For Koreans, since the Shilla Kingdom, when national exams to candidates to become bureaucrats, education as a gateway and a path to progress and proof of one's value. This peninsula, attached to China, of Japan, and south of Russia, colonized by Japan and then later split by foreign powers. In 1953, not a long time ago, the two Koreas fought a civil war. Although the Armistice Agreement was signed in July of 1953, but the war has not ended. The ancient civilized nation, two republics, each only 71 years old. South Korea is growing up to be a great democratic nation, effectively and peacefully, and ousted a corrupt regime, uphold and honor a long history of protest, and are deeply engaged in the formation of their. South Korea is a member of the OECD and the G20, of its status as an advanced economy. How did Koreans become global players? How did it happen so fast? Koreans around the world, nearly everyone, Koreans are willing to figure things out. We will read, we will study, we will try to solve problems. Koreans care immensely about education. So if everyone needs an education, Koreans' value of education different from Spain, or Palestine, or Syria, or Ghana. From its Confucian roots for well over 1,000 years, can be improved markedly by educational achievement. Millennia of social conditioning is hard to shake off. Despite the calamities that Korea has suffered, that Koreans have endured, even as recently the crisis and the IMF bailout, education has become even more valued. In South Korea today, it is not sufficient to send one's child to school. Rather, the child will begin private tutoring starting at the age of 4. Korean high school students sleep on average 5 hours a day. And when they are awake, they are studying. Why? Every year, the college entrance exam, or the Sunung, is offered exactly once. 600,000 South Korean students take this exam. She receives will determine where she can apply and be admitted. So, if you are a Korean parent, help your child. What do? More likely than not, nearly every South Korean parent sends her child through Hagwons. Hagwon, Hagwon, for a for-profit tutoring business. Receive private, supplemental education. in South Korea to study anything, or even how to boost your child's creativity. Think about it. Private tutors have always existed. Public education or compulsory education for many countries, including the United States. Requirements from state to state. We have Stanley Kaplan or Princeton Review. Those are our national hagwons. And for elementary school levels, there's Kumon, a Japanese export where children can start as young as 3 years old. In America, in South Korea, we can safely assume